welcome to Adapt It, the podcast where we explore adaptations of various forms. I'm today's host, Tom, and with me is
Pat.
And KJ.
Today we'll be discussing Night Bus from 1933 by Samuel Hopkins Adams and its famous adaptation, It Happened One Night from 1934. All right, so It Happened One Night is a lovely little movie from a somewhat long short story. I would say the story is somewhere between a short story and a novella that was published in Cosmo in 1933 by a author who became famous for writing kind of pseudo erotica later in his career. And it
That is
fo-
not surprising.
oh,
Having read this thing, that is not surprising.
Fair enough.
I know we'll get into it, but I know KJ has issues with the movie. The story is very different.
It is, yeah. It Happened One Night, a movie directed by Frank Capra for Columbia Pictures, and it was a big change in film at the time, and we'll get into some of that. It was a movie that Clark Gable didn't want to do. He was thrown over there as a punishment from MGM to do this movie. Claudette Colbert did not want to do this movie because she did not want to work for Columbia, which was considered a poverty row studio at the time, and they doubled her salary in order to convince her to do it. Nobody thought it was going to be any good. Nobody thought it was going to make any money. Most Oscars at that time went to large spectacles, and it cleaned up at the awards. It follows two characters, our heiress, who is played by Colbert, Ellie Andrews, the daughter of a millionaire, who is attempting to flee from Miami to New York on a bus to meet her potentially future husband, King Wesley. Along the way, she runs into Clark Gable's character, the news reporter Peter, who is down on his luck, and he sees her as an opportunity to sell a big story to the newspaper, get back on his feet, and she needs him because she's very naive, doesn't know how to manage the bus or the roads or the normal world, and they eventually start as enemies and become lovers. It's sort of borrowing from Shakespeare. It forms the screwball comedy and the kind of the romantic comedy from here on out. And it is considered a great classic. It is also the first movie to win the top 5 Academy Awards: film, director, script, actor, actress, something that wouldn't be done again until One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I think only one more time with Silence of the Lambs. So this movie was a very big deal. Everyone was surprised it did well. If you see Claudette Colbert at the Oscars, she's wearing clothes. She's not wearing glamorous clothes. She's wearing clothes she was wearing on a train because she did not expect to win. So she left and was on a train. And they're like, "You won an Oscar." And so she had to run from the train back to the award ceremony to take the award and run back to the train. So this movie was.
Did they hold the train for her?
They held the train for her.
See, so that she was
Yeah,
right.
she was right. They did hold the train for her. Yeah, the movie did not initially make a lot of money when it was released in February, but it became very, very popular in small towns. And a lot of small rural areas kept going to the theater when this movie was run. Columbia at the time was a poor theater, and a poor studio. It didn't have its own theaters. So most movie studios at the time did have their own theaters. And that kind of word of mouth recognition pushed this movie into one of the top earners of the year. And so it really is a very, very interesting history to the movie as well as the movie itself. And so those are all things we could get into as we go into it. And so I think I'll start with general thoughts about either the story, which is interesting, or the movie itself. So maybe we'll start just with our thoughts on this film when we first saw it, our initial and current reactions to it.
I guess I can start. I have a vivid memory of the first time I saw this movie. I was in Hong Kong. I actually, when I was searching my emails to see if because I couldn't remember whether I was like, oh, I bought this on iTunes back in 2012 or 2000. It was 2012. So I searched through it. And I was like, oh, I only rented it, so I had to like watch it on. I watched it on Tubi, which I'd never heard of before. But I watched it on Tubi. But anyway, so I remember having watched it before, and mostly when I watched it at the time, it was because I knew it was one of the ones to win all five Oscars. I thought, okay, I should probably go see this movie. Um, and so I watched it again, and then I've never read the story before. As Tom said, it's a fairly lengthy story. I did not realize how long it was. It is more like a short novel, than a short story. Even like a short novella. It's kind of in between. But it's interesting. What I found most striking about it this time is that compared to last week's movie, compared to um uh All Quiet on the Western Front, that movie, I think you could basically pull it out, pop it into a theater now, and more or less it still fully stands up on its own. This, it just doesn't. Um, it does in the sense like it's a cute story. It has some flaws, obviously, because it's not, it's a movie of its time to a certain extent. As Tom said, I think it's clearly drawing from something like Taming of the Shrew, which is basically like be really mean to the person, who's kind of shrewish, and then they'll learn that they're a shrew and stop being a shrew. It's not really a very modern approach to gender relations. But it's sort of it's a common trope in literature for a long time. So that's one thing. It just doesn't, but so it's a fun story, it's a cute story, but it doesn't strike me as being compared, lots of romantic comedies have been made since then, and many of them have arguably done it better than this one has. This one is unique in that it's sort of essentially the first major, really, really good one. It reminds me a lot, and again, like I would say, His Girl Friday. I love His Girl Friday. That's a better version of this movie. Like it just is. His Girl Friday is better, but it didn't do it first. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why it's sort of important, and it's still like you could watch it, but it's not like I watched it and really laughed that much. Like it's got a couple funny jokes, but a lot of its sort of takes are a little cliche by, I think, even by modern standards. I think by any standard, some of it's a little cliche. Some of it's clever, but a lot of it's cliche. But something like His Girl Friday, I still laugh at. That movie is funny and it's really clever and it's really witty, and that one still stands up. I'm not sure this one does. That would be my first major comment on it. It's still good, but it just doesn't, it just kind of feels like a dated romantic comedy. Compared to the short story, though, I thought was actually pretty good. It's a lot different. It's a lot less harsh, in terms of his treatment of her. His treatment is pretty bad. Um, but it's a lot less harsh. It's also a lot clearer, and I don't know what it is about the movie. Maybe it's just because Clark Gable is fairly glamorous himself. It seems a little clearer in the story that she is super rich and super spoiled. Like he calls her a brat in the movie a lot. I don't think he does it in the short story, which again is part of the thing. Like he doesn't call her a brat to her face, but she is a brat in the short story. Much, 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 much worse.
Mhm.
She's just kind of obnoxious, and he kind of is like, you can't do that. You can't treat people that way. Like he's more trying to like teach her like a child. Like that's not how you behave. And so it does have a more sort of, her behavior is worse and his behavior is less harsh. So for that reason, the short story actually I think was better than the movie in that sense. It's aged a little better. It doesn't come across as harsh, but I don't think it's aged as well as something like All Quiet. Like I don't think you could take this movie, pop it into a theater nowadays, and have people be impressed. I think they would see a lot of stuff that they see a lot since then.
It is interesting. The short story was changed a bit, and I actually found notes about the adaptation from a screenwriter who, it was Connolly, I think Mike Connolly was his name, who didn't write the script, but Capra gave him an early version of the script, and a lot of actresses were turning it down. And so went to the scriptwriter, was like, "What do you think of this?" And he knew the story, so he'd read the story, and he was like, in the story, she's a brat because she's an heiress. So she's just a brat. Um, you can't do that. What you have to do is she has to be bored with being an heiress. People will like that. It will make her more sympathetic. She's not nearly as sympathetic in the in the story as she is in the movie. You like her a lot more.
Absolutely agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the problem.
I think it's a problem with the story though, because she's just annoying, and part of the problem too with him is you're not entirely sure why he doesn't have a lot of incentive to keep helping her. In the
I think it's
movie,
the
they
implication is he's a good dude and he just feels bad for her. I think that's
yeah.
literally the implication in the story. That's
Mm,
why I feel like it's less of a problem in the story because she is so obnoxious in the
mm,
story. And he is just like, I feel bad. I don't want to leave this person. She's going to get just, she's already gotten robbed. He's basically like something really bad is going to happen to her
mm,
if she's left by herself at a bus stop in Georgia. Like I think that's the implication is that's what I read it is just
mm,
he's a decent dude who's like I can't do it. Like it's too cruel and
yeah.
it's not her fault that she's completely and utterly clueless how to treat people.
Mhm. Yeah, and he's also a little bit different too um in terms of his priorities and what he does. Like in the story, he's a former painter who's now an amateur chemist who's got kind of a
Oh yeah,
deal
that's not at all
going.
there, yeah.
Yeah, I think the change is different
He
because
has a change to like he's come up with like a new petrol distillation process
yeah,
that
yeah,
he's on his way to New York to peddle for $10,000.
yeah,
And it's
which
like
he gets.
which he gets.
Mhm.
He gets the money that he wants. And it's not it's 8,000 and this is like
It's
again,
eight
this is where
thousand a
her
year. You're gonna get
8,000 a
8,000 a
year and
year.
he goes, it's 8,000 a year and she goes, "How could someone live on that?" And he goes, "Not 8,000 just flat, 8,000 a year." He's like, "I'm gonna, he would be a millionaire
Mhm.
essentially." And she's like, "I could never live on anything less than 10,000." And it's like that's the you're like,
That's more the dynamic.
God, she's so
She's
annoying.
really annoying. But then the same writer was like, no, you don't make him like a painter. Like you make him one of us. You make him a crusader. And he's on his outs with his pig-headed editor, and that makes him sympathetic because he gets to be one of us. And so what you do is you take like The Taming of the Shrew, or you take Much Ado About Nothing, and you develop this or put into it this like class thing, this class difference between them, which isn't in any Shakespeare, obviously. Everybody has to be of the same class if they're going to get together in Shakespeare. But here, that's the big change. And yes, they're of different classes in the story as well, but it's less of a sore point, I suppose. Like Peter, Clark Gable's Peter, like despises these people. Like he treats her badly, not just because of her, but because she's one of them. She's like one of the rich, and it's 1934, and it's 20% unemployment. And so that seems to be the adaptation change that was designed to make them sympathetic. You can make him one of us and teach them a lesson, and you stop making her like such a dismissive brat. And she's just a naif. She just doesn't, she's perfectly nice. She just doesn't know how things work, and it's a little more gentle. Especially, I don't think there's this one scene in the story where she goes, "Oh, those people who are unemployed, they're just lazy. My father always tells me they're just lazy, and anything else is socialism." I'm like, you can't put that in the movie and have people like this woman. Like we need to cut that.
It's even worse than that because she says the line because that's like one of the ones where and that's very early in the story. Like that
mm,
is obviously meant to make you go, "Oh my gosh, she is horrible." Because
mm,
she says, "Oh, the bus driver will wait for me. They all wait for me." And he says, "The bus driver's not going to wait. He'll lose his job." And she goes,
well,
"That's
yeah.
fine. He can get another one. He can give up his job for me. He'll get another job." And the guy goes, "No, he can't. There's all this unemployment." And she goes, "Unemployment is just socialism. Yeah, that's just socialist talk.
Mm.
My dad says, yeah, anybody who wants a job can get a job, and all of them are just loafers and lazy." And you're just like, oh my God, like she is really frustrating. Like that's the
1933. This story came out in
1933.
1933.
And that's the thing is you're just like, wow, this lady is really, and that, she really digs a lot into your nerve. And that's why I feel like the story works. And it's good. I didn't know the story that they had to change it because the actresses didn't want to play her. And I totally get why they didn't want to play
Mhm.
her. Although it would have been a lot more fun. But, that get why they didn't want to, because then it ruins their careers. They do not want to be associated with this character. And so they soften her, which then breaks it because, like, why are you being mean to this poor girl?
Yeah, I mean it's
I mean, I get it, it's
I
there.
don't think it ruins it, but
I don't think it ruins it, but I don't think it does come across a lot more harsh than it should.
he
Like
comes off
it's
a lot more harsh than she. Yeah.
and it's more like this is the like I guess I'm supposed to have concluded that she's a sort of a rich obnoxious person, even though I'm not really seeing it that much. Like it
Well,
seems
I
like
don't.
mostly what she's asking for is pretty reasonable, but I think I'm supposed to like this is just the like okay, I'm just going to suspend my disbelief and assume that that's what I'm seeing.
But I don't think so. I think we're supposed to see him as equally unreasonable as she is. She's naive, she doesn't know how the world works, but he's full of prejudice and assumption. And he has to figure out, no, this is a human being, not a representation of her class and its crimes. And she has to sort of figure out, oh, okay, this is actually how people live and this is how the world is, and I don't really live in the common world, and I have to, sort of develop some sort of thicker skin in order to deal with the world as it is. I think we are supposed to see him as being far too prejudicial. I don't think we're supposed to like his treatment of her all the time, or even most of the time. I think there's
I
probably
think you're supposed to laugh at it though. Like
you
it's
are,
they're playing
yeah.
it for laughs.
Yeah, oh yeah, but I don't think you're supposed to despise it, but I don't think that makes him in the right. Right? Like I think that 'cause she says often to him, like, you're being awfully harsh, and like that scene with the straw, where they kind of lie down on the straw, and she kind of tells him like you're not you're being harsh, and he's just saying, oh, you're a spoiled brat, and what she's asking for is fairly reasonable, and I don't think
I
you're
think
supposed
at
to see
that
him in
point,
the
but I
right.
think early on, I don't think that's true. I think later on, her demands are becoming more reasonable, but I think at the beginning, her demands are not as
Oh
reasonable.
yeah, like asking the bus driver to wait. Like, oh, he'll
Yeah.
wait for me. It's like, no, that's not how things work. Yeah, that is unreasonable. But I don't think he is correct, right? I think his mode of change has to be he has to sort of get over his prejudices and realize they're a really good match. And I think that's more clear, especially when we also have to get over our prejudices. And I think it manifests in two places with her father, who initially we're supposed to see as this bully, but later he actually has a pretty delightful scene, both with her and with him, and also with the newspaper editor, who we're also supposed to see as a bully. But when they break up and Clark Gable's Peter is like, yeah, it was just a joke on you. The newspaper editor doesn't bawl him out. He gives him some whiskey and he's like, hey, talk to me when you're finished drinking. Basically the newspaper editor gets it. He doesn't act in the way we expect him to. He's far more sympathetic, and the father is very sympathetic. We think of him as a bully, kind of trying to just unreasonably control his daughter, but you find out, no, actually, King is pretty bad. He's not a great guy. The father has a pretty good judge of, he's a pretty good judge of character. He understands his daughter. He understands Peter. He kind of likes Peter. He doesn't like King, who's a poor choice for her.
But King's gonna come in on his auto gyro. I love that. I love that. King's gonna fly
Yeah.
his auto gyro into the wedding. I'm like,
He
oh
also
gosh,
he
this
looks
movie
like
is
he's
old.
yeah. He also looks like he's in his 50s, right? He looks about as old as the father. I yeah, but anyway, um that so I think that's what's happening with the movie. I think it's supposed to be played for
I think that's what
laughs,
it
but
wants you to think, but I'm not sure it pulls it off. I'm not, I think that is the goal. And I
mm,
think that is sort of what happens. I just don't know that I think it makes a few leaps to get there that it doesn't quite show.
mhm.
That's why I say I'm not positive it would translate well into modern age because modern audiences kind of expect to sort of be guided along to see it a little more clearly and follow the path a little more clearly of what's going on. And I think this one kind of makes a few leaps in there that aren't quite convincing, I guess is
Mhm.
what I would say. Like I don't need her to go and have like a Gollum Smeagol scene off in a corner being like, the like, should I be poor or should I be rich? Like I don't need that. But it is a little it just it I didn't quite find the whole transition convincing. I know what I'm supposed to see,
Mhm.
and that's the film is just telling me that that's what happened, and that's fine. I can follow that. It felt a little sloppy maybe by modern standards.
Yeah, I think she's supposed to eventually demonstrate competence, right? I think that's what she's supposed to get there, where she can actually be
She
a
does,
full
but her
person.
most competent moment is when he's pretending to beat her.
Well, no, her most competent moment is when she gets the car, when she shows her
Uh,
leg.
Oh, that's true too. I know, but
Yeah.
I feel like that is a very competent moment. I think, but one of her other great moments, her first moment of great competence, is when they pretend to be the couple
Hmm.
together when she's supposed to hide, and he's
Yeah.
like, Stop wailing, stop wailing," and he's like screaming at her like, "Ah," like that scene. I mean, that scene is just it's a bit uncomfortable
Hmm.
as a like this is a weird, like I get it. That's probably was a more common scene to be depicted, but
Hmm.
I don't know, it doesn't quite come across as convincing.
Hmm.
Like I get they're intentionally acting as though they're kind of low class, like that's what
Hmm.
she's trying to be. So they're kind of playing a class game to some extent there. But that's one of her most competent moments,
Hmm.
and you're sort of meant to leave that and celebrate it. And that's one that's not one that actually the scene kind of works if you just accept its logic. But that's one of the ones that just doesn't translate well to modern
Hmm.
eye or ear.
All right. Fair enough. I
But I
didn't.
mean, I don't know. Do you think it does?
I think it does. Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I'm also okay with the fact that it, some of the gender politics of it, so to speak, don't work anymore. That's an older form, and I'm okay with going like, that's not how we change the way we interact, so to speak, between the genders. But
No,
they
and
didn't
I guess
then, and
that's what
that's
I mean. That
fine. Like
scene,
I'm willing
but
to.
I guess that's what I
Mhm.
mean. That's one of the more if that scene within the logic that it has actually works reasonably well.
Mhm.
To your point, that is not how we would approach a gender role situation in a,
Mhm.
whatever, 90 years later. That it comes across as archaic. Fine, you can sort of reject it, but and I'll accept the scene for its own logic. But it's sort of just like. I guess I don't quite get the jump from there because then shortly after that is the scene where he starts yelling at her about the straw, right?
But I think that scene where he's yelling at her about the straw, he's in the wrong. That's where
Yes.
we see, no, this guy's just got a thing about these people. And I don't think it's about women. I think it's about class. I think it's about rich people. He's got a thing about rich people, and he needs to get over it because he's not seeing this person anymore, right? He's just seeing like a villain basically, and there's no reason for it. I think in that scene he's being unrealistic not unrealistic, unreasonable. I think that reveals him at kind of his worst. Um, and it's also the scene where and part of it too is that's the scene they get closest to kissing, right? They fall down in the straw, and then there's this kind of negative tension, this kind of prejudice that brings them apart. So I think at that point, it's kind of like, no, she's not some child anymore who she's not a brat. She's kind of being able to deal with things. She kind of deals with things very well. Um, you still aren't seeing this, and maybe you are. That maybe that's why he leans in for the kiss and then gets angry or scared or stupid, however it is. But I don't. I think that's the moment where it's like, okay, it's not all hero and damsel in distress. Like this person has to change for this thing to work out. That's how I read that straw scene.
No, I think that is the way you're supposed to read it. I guess there's just some of the scenes I felt like I understood what they were trying to show me. I just wasn't 100% convinced that they
Okay.
did.
Yeah.
That's more what I'm saying. Like, I'm not saying that I agree. That scene probably, I think that's what that scene was supposed to show. I just don't know if it showed me that.
Hmm.
Like, I just don't know if I found that particular scene convincing, or some of the other ones. Particular, sometimes they came across as just almost rushed, but considering the movie's an hour and 45 minutes, which is somewhat long, for this kind of movie, it couldn't really slow it down much more. But the ending is particularly felt a little tacked on, but that's fine. Um, I could have done without the ending.
Hmm.
But, overall, it's a fine movie. I just don't think if you took it to a modern day, it would, you couldn't plop it down. I think there's too many, even its gender issues aside, it feels it's a little bit of a weird movie. Like, I don't think it's particular, like, I don't think it would sell that well in the modern day.
Hmm.
Like, I don't think it's aged as well as, say, All Quiet has. And that might be because war is still around, and war and fear of death are still a common thing. And
Hmm.
many of the problems of that movie aren't really a problem. We're not really not really all that concerned with many of its preoccupations. So we're not really preoccupied with the driven journalist, and his, issues with his boss, or, we're not as concerned about a rich person and a poor person meeting on a bus. Like, it's just, I don't it's just those are just issues we don't care about anymore. They're not as prominent.
Hmm.
They don't carry as much weight, and so as a story, it feels less interesting. I thought, although I think where you could make this story actually pretty work better is if you reverse the gender roles, and you have sort of a boy, a man who's just completely clueless. Like, that actually you could make work. I think
That's
that's where
Judd Apatow's movies, aren't they?
yeah, it's sort of that's exactly that kind of
It's
concept.
Knocked
Like,
Up is kind of the
yeah, it's the same. That is exactly it. Like, that's the kind of movie, that is how we actually see it now. We don't see women as sort of being helpless figures that need to be helped through the world by men. We often actually, at least films do. Um, Films like to portray men as, these sort of, adolescents that never grew up. Even like the old school kind of thing,
hmm
just these sort of adolescents who never grew up and need a woman to sort of bring them into society and maturity. That is more common in modern films.
hmm
So you could take this movie and flip it that way, and it actually that would make a movie that people would actually watch.
Yeah, it's a combination of the romantic comedy and the coming of age, which
Yeah.
is a
I mean, that's
weird
what this
thing.
is. I mean, this sort of is too. I mean, this is sort of a combination. This is a semi, I mean, it's the focus isn't on her coming of age, because the focus is less on her than on them as a couple. But you could easily shift the focus in this movie and make it more of a coming of age for her.
Yeah, you could. I think with the coming of age, like with I think I'm thinking of the Judd Apatow movie, so Knocked Up is a good example. A lot of the focus on that movie is that the what's his name? Seth Rogen. Seth Rogen is in his 20s and is acting like a teenager. And the idea is like he should have most coming of age movies actually feature teenagers or children who then
True.
grow up. And the irony of
But a
those
lot of
movies,
modern movies, but this is a trope of a
oh
lot
yeah,
of movies in the
is
2000s,
they're
2010s.
combining coming of
Yeah.
age by sliding that scale up and
Yeah.
saying men are coming of age much later than they used to. That's the type of thing. And it's the romance. It's not the event that brings you into adulthood, like some, like Secret Garden thing or something like that. It's the romance that makes you an adult and socializes you. So that would be kind of a genre shift as well. Um, but yeah, and I guess it's interesting that the romantic comedy, I would say now people are watching more romantic comedies than ever, but they're not considered prestige. Like nobody's going to the theaters to see them. All the romantic comedies are on Hallmark Channel. That's all Hallmark does is they churn out like 30 romantic comedies a year, and people love them. They watch them compulsively.
They
Um,
filmed one of those in my hometown. And they filmed it, it was a Christmas one, but they
mhm,
filmed it in like August. So there was like Santa's sleigh going down, and they had to like take the leaves off the trees, like some of the
mhm.
trees, and they were like turning on all the Christmas lights on like all these, like, it was like one of the weird, I'm like, a very odd scene. It's like Santa and like all these like people in fur coats cheering as this sleigh rides down through downtown.
Mhm. It must be
Anyway,
incredibly uncomfortable to film.
I'm sure they were.
And just sweating your ass off and not looking like you're sweating. I remember I did a movie once. I was like, and we were doing a scene, and we had to. It was like a spring scene, but it was really cold. It was like 10 degrees, and I was working with one of the actors, and he's like, "I worked with Jerry Orbach once, and you know what he told me? He says, if it's cold and you're doing a scene, you got to tell yourself, it's not cold. There you go." Like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Freezing out here. It didn't help at all. Yeah, I guess maybe I'm the person here who liked the movie. I mean,
Didn't dislike it. I just don't. There was like, I'm not gonna watch that again. Like, 'cause it's just I'm not. I'll watch probably All Quiet on the Western Front again. Like, if someone said like, "Do you want to watch that?" I'd be like, "Yeah, it's a great movie." If someone said, "Do you want to watch?" Do you want to watch it happen one night? I'd be like, "Yeah, there's better movies. There are better movies. Other movies have done it better since then."
Mhm.
That's my thing. Is other movies have done it better since then. I guess that's what I would say. So I respect it for being one of the first to do it, but I don't find it that interesting as a movie in its own right.
Okay. I suppose things I liked about it would be really like their performances a lot, especially her. I feel like that's a performance that would fit well into a modern audience, especially in the hailing a car scene. Um,
That one's fun.
yeah, her irony there is really
But
nice.
individual scenes are good.
Mhm,
Individual scenes are good all over the place.
mhm. The
Um,
trapeze scene is the
I
flying trapeze
love the
scene is
trapeze scene. I
lovely. Yeah.
love the trapeze scene. And that's the thing is individual scenes are good, but there's just as a whole, I'm not sure I liked it.
Mhm,
Like I'm not sure I particularly enjoyed it. But individual scenes are great. The flying trapeze scene is great. I love the flying trapeze scene. That's the one that reminded me of which doesn't really happen ever on the Fung Wah or the Bolt Bus, but those are kind of things where I'm like, man, that would have been fun if that was on the Bolt
mhm.
Bus or like that would have made those bus rides a lot more fun. The number of times that you're just jammed in there and really uncomfortable. Like there could, just like they just look like fun. They had fun. There was a lot more going on. So I liked that scene. There's great scenes. I just don't know as a whole.
Yeah, I I think it worked as a whole because of, I suppose, the individual scene. I mean, there's no real scene I don't like in it. I mean, even the Walls of Jericho scene is lovely. It looks great too for a romantic comedy. I think it's beautiful looking. Like when they're in that dark
That's the only
cabin.
scene that was, I knew you were going to say this
Mm,
because that scene is really attractive. Like her when it's sort of like she's kind of like cuddling, like kind of like scared, the whole thing, and she's just kind of sitting there with like the blankets up around, and they've got the light that and the rain falling through the window. That's a really attractive scene.
mm.
Um,
But even him carrying her across the water, like that's beautiful looking, and there's nothing to, and or the scene in the haystacks, that looks gorgeous too. That's laid out in a kind of lovely way. So I think the movie looks good, and I like there's these little bits too that are I always find really exciting in it whenever I revisit it. Like the scene with the report with the news editor where he comforts him when the
yeah,
guy's like you expect him to chew him out and he doesn't. I always forget that scene's there. Like I've seen this movie a few times now, and I think that's such a nice thing. And I love the redemption of the father and redemption in terms of how we perceive him, not in terms of something he's done wrong. Where you realize like, oh, he's not being an overprotective father. King is it sucks, and he doesn't want his daughter to marry somebody she's inevitably going to divorce. So,
but what is so bad about King? And then this would be another one where I feel
well,
like
this,
this is another one where like I'm told that he's. I mean, and again, it like is this. I'm gonna ride my auto gyro into the wedding. I'm like, oh God, like it just reminds me of the when Mr. Burns goes to the post office and he's like, I want to get this telegram to the Prussian consulate in Siam by this time. Have I missed the 12 o'clock auto gyro? Like, it's really, that's what this reminds me of when I see him riding his auto gyro. But
yeah.
the yeah, I get it. You've told me he's kind of a douche, but I mean, I don't know. What did he do?
Well,
other
he
than the
hasn't.
fact that I'm told that he's a douche.
Well, it's not that he's done anything, but it's the same thing if in Philadelphia's story, when Katharine Hepburn's going to marry the wrong person. The wrong person doesn't do anything. He's just the wrong person. He
But
looks
that person
wrong
was
and
unbelievably boring, and they
he was
make it
just
very clear
boring.
that he's boring.
Mhm.
I guess I just never saw enough of King, whatever his name is. Bing, what is
King
his name?
Fidor, I think.
King, whatever
Vidor?
it is.
Yeah.
Whatever his name is. I didn't see enough of him. Like in Philadelphia Story, you're right. The whole point is Katharine Hepburn, is vivacious and lovely, and who is I don't remember the
I don't even remember the guy's name. I
no
was
idea who it
in
is.
it and I don't remember. Yeah.
Yeah, but I
Um,
guess that's the point. I mean, he's
mm,
just boring, and it's so obvious he's boring. And that's the point, is that she's going to be miserable with this person, and that's clear. But I guess with whatever his name is, like it doesn't seem like, even when she's like, let's go and we'll never stop and we'll have fun and we'll do. I was waiting for him to be like, whoa, 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 that's not what we're here for. We have to go to
mhm.
my mother's next Sunday. Like that's what you're waiting for. And instead he's like, yeah, that sounds great. And I'm like, then
Mhm.
what is the problem with this man? It's just like those are the kind of things where it just felt shortcutted, where it was like, okay, I will accept that I'm not supposed to think he's a good match, but I don't know why he's not a good match.
Yeah, I think it's this whole thing of casting, right? He's a bad match because he's not Clark Gable. Like you have an option. You have that guy or
Yeah, I
you
mean,
have Clark
I remember
Gable.
hearing that. I remember hearing that
Yeah, we heard
argument
that
from,
from
yeah, it was like,
Steve. Yeah.
yeah, Steve, and he
Mm.
was like, well, of course, Katharine Hepburn's not going to end up with Jimmy Stewart, and I'm like, why not?
Well,
Why wouldn't
I
she?
think that argument doesn't quite work for Jimmy Stewart because Jimmy
Yeah, but
Stewart is awesome, and
yeah,
King
but the argument
Fidor
was
is.
that, Jimmy Stewart can't end up with. But the argument was Jimmy Stewart can't end up with Katharine Hepburn
Mhm.
because that's not the right. They're not on the same caliber of actor. You're supposed to see Katharine Hepburn and it is Cary Grant, right?
Mhm.
No, it's not.
Yes.
It is Cary Grant. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're supposed to see Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant. They end up together. That's the proper match in that kind of story.
Mhm.
You know, um, you know, Jimmy Stewart ends up with like Mary Pickford or something like
Mhm.
that. There is a hierarchy of actors and actresses, and so I don't know. That seems like that's shortcutting it to my mind. You couldn't do that nowadays. You know what I
Yeah, I
mean?
suppose you'd have to have a justification, but I think even there it would be like that would to me feel a little cheap. I mean, you get that a little bit with King at the end where he's perfectly happy to and agree to an annulment for $200,000.
But why didn't
That
they do that before? Why
yeah,
didn't they
yeah,
make that clear before?
that
That's
he's
the
the
kind
type
of
of
thing where,
person.
yeah, he's the type of person who would do that. Like you could. This is just where it was like it just felt like they just were like, we don't want to have another scene. Just
Mhm.
just move it along a little more quickly.
Yeah, I don't
And
know. I wouldn't have. I mean, having it done before would give us the evidence earlier on, so we knew in advance he was a bad guy.
yeah,
I mean, he's just the wrong guy. I'm even I don't even really need him to get the $200,000. He's just he's just the wrong guy. He just looks wrong. I mean, he's not Clark Gable. That seems to be enough of the argument. And I know it's a bit of a shorthand, but because it
but it's a
is
shorthand. I don't know. You can, and
that
I
you can get
know
away
it's the.
with
I
anymore.
don't
Yeah.
think it's a shorthand. You can. That's my point. I totally get it, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
willing to accept it as a piece of its time.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I see Philadelphia Story, it's a similar thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think you can get away with it now. You can't just say Tom Cruise ends up with, I don't know, Katie Holmes or whatever, instead of Catherine Gyllenhaal, because Katie Holmes is an A-list, and was it what was her name? Was it Catherine Gyllenhaal? What was her name?
Gyllenhaal was, is that her name? Who's the woman in
Wasn't
The
there? Who
Dark
was the
Knight?
other woman?
So another revelation I had while listening to you guys is Spaceballs a retelling of It Happened One Night?
Yeah.
Mm.
It is an
Right?
homage.
She's trying to run
That
away
Well,
last
from
scene
the
is
yeah,
the
wedding.
last scene is 100% an homage to it. It's
mhm,
almost exactly the same.
The
mhm.
plot, point by point, I think
Well,
is
I mean, it's more of the romantic comedy trend, right? Which comes
But
from
I think you're
the
totally
last
right.
scene
That
is
last
homage.
scene is absolutely the same, and a lot of the plot is the same. It is true.
But yeah,
supposed to marry that boring dude. The father's like, you got to marry her. She tries to run away.
mhm.
Not Clark
Oh
Gable, but
yeah, I guess
Bill
that's
Yeah, that's what I'm
Pullman
saying.
comes
It
to
is
the
a remarkably,
rescue.
yeah. I'm assuming he pulled that plot. And the last scene when they're walking down the aisle is almost exactly from the movie. So
mhm.
I'm sure if
That's what
he
he's doing.
if he didn't know it when he wrote it, someone pointed it out to him and was like, "This is exactly the same as It Happened One Night." And then that's why he put that scene in, because it was
Mhm,
funny, or he was consciously doing it. I'm not sure which, but
mhm.
it is 100%.
It happened
very
one night.
similar to the movie.
Hmm.
Whether he meant to, clearly he eventually recognized it. Whether he meant to or not from the beginning, I have no idea. But
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, it's an enormously influential movie, and that's what I say. Like, it's got a lot going.
You don't have My Girl Friday without this movie.
Yeah, and I love His Girl Friday. That's one of my
Or
favorite
His
movies
Girl
ever.
Friday.
And His Girl Friday, and this feels my girl, yeah,
Tom's Girl Friday.
my girl. Um, which if you've ever read the play is interesting too. If you've ever read the play
I
front page,
haven't.
yeah.
No, that's a Ben
But
Hecht, right?
I don't remember who wrote it, but it's a decent play.
Hmm.
But I love that movie. That movie is a great movie. But and yeah, you absolutely you don't get it. Even watching this, but it just feels like His Girl Friday is a better version of this. I would much rather watch His Girl Friday than
Well,
watch
yeah, she has a lot
American One
more
Night.
agency, and I mean, it's a work. They're at their job, so she is the best person at that job, right? So you get a lot more of her to do, and I guess yeah, it's also a lot wittier, right? It's
Yeah, it's
witty.
just funnier,
Hmm.
and that's the thing is like there's not a lot watching this that I was like, that's pretty funny.
Hmm.
Like there was just I don't remember laughing that much.
Yeah, I
Is there
never found
anything
it.
that's really funny?
I never found it that funny. I just always found it very. But I
But then
find
that's not a
her.
very good comedy.
Well, I don't know. I don't think the only standard for comedy is that you're, kind of laughing out loud. I mean, it could be the standard of comedy is that it
Like you've got to
resolves.
smile.
Well,
Like
because
it has to
yeah, I
be a
was
joke.
enjoying
There has to be a joke,
at
like
some point.
at some point. And it's not to say there was nothing. I mean, there were some. There were probably a couple of moments, but I can't think of anything that's other than the hitchhiking scene is
The
really good.
hitchhiking scene made me laugh. Yeah.
That made me laugh. That scene is funny.
Hmm.
Um, and that scene feels like you could pop that out and put it in a modern film.
The stripping scene when he's like,
That
some
was pretty
people,
funny actually
yeah,
too. That's
yeah,
pretty
yeah.
funny too.
This is where I'm different. I take off my shoes, and yeah, I like that.
That one actually was funny too. I mean, again, I shouldn't say that there was nothing that was really funny in it, but I think His Girl Friday is a better riff on this theme, and maybe it is because the I don't remember what I can't remember any of the characters' names in that movie. But maybe it's just
Friday.
yeah, for yeah, his girl Friday, um, whatever her name is, his Friday, but she seems to have a lot more agency, and she just does more, and it just has like more of a sort of frenetic pace to it, and
Hmm.
just yeah, that hard boiled quality is much. The hard boiled quality feels more even. This one, the hard boiled quality feels just a bit mean sometimes, and it just
Yeah.
doesn't quite land as well.
Mhm. Yeah, it doesn't seem that hard boiled, I guess, to me. Uh,
But I think, well, it's hard boiled in the sense that he knows how to get, or at least he thinks he
mhm,
knows how to get things done.
mhm,
And in the story, I think makes that clearer. He knows where to go to get food, cheapest food you can get, that's good quality, etc. Like he knows how to do that. He knows where the hotels are. He knows how to save money on a
mhm,
hotel. He knows how to protect his stuff on a bus. He knows how to play this game fairly well.
mhm.
Um, and that makes him sort of and he's sort of jaded. He's got that quality. He can kind of he can, but what I guess it's just it comes across as a bit meaner when you want. It's like, I mean, I don't find it as funny when he threatens to murder children.
Yeah.
Like that particular scene was just like, wow, you got him to a dark place, bro, in order
Mhm,
to stop this dude from turning her in.
mhm.
You just threatened his
Oh, yeah,
children.
yeah, yeah.
You just
Shapely.
threatened to murder his
Mhm,
children, like literally. I'm like, wow, that went to a different place.
mhm, mhm,
So it's that's why I just think His Girl Friday is better. But I get it as a seminal film. It's very important. It's
mhm.
good. I would enjoy watching it as a piece of sort of in the same way that you can you watch Triumph of the Will. That's a seminal film. It's really important. You're not going to necessarily watch it because that's a bad example because that's obviously an extreme. But you're going to watch that because you want to see the use of cinematography, and that's a really important historic film. But something, and I'm not trying to compare it and say that it's the same thing, but I'm not going to enjoy this film the way that I would enjoy His Girl Friday. I'm going to watch this as a piece of historical curiosity, not necessarily. And the performances are fun and it's not terrible. but I'm going to watch it more as a historical curiosity than I am as a great as a film that I enjoy.
So I want to compare it to something more modern. Unfortunately, I haven't seen it. I've only seen ads for it. But do you guys remember the TV show that starred Paris Hilton and maybe her friend
Oh, The
in the
Simple
early
Oh,
Life. The Simple Life.
2000s?
yes. With
Simple Life.
Nicole Richie.
Nicole Richie. I would imagine the comedy in that is going for the same type of
Yes.
comedy in
Yeah,
It's
from
going for
what
class
right.
comedy.
I've
It's going
not
for class-based
seen.
comedy. Although
Mhm,
that's going for also for
Right.
raunch class-based comedy, but
mhm.
Oh, okay.
I think it
It
meant to be a
kind of
little
moves in that
raunchier.
direction.
I think it's just meant to be
Hmm.
like she's parading around in her knickers as the
Ah,
Yeah.
so not that she just didn't know how to book a hotel or
Well, I
whatever.
think that is
It's
part of it,
on
but then I
top of
think it'll
that,
be
she
like, yeah,
also
I think
got it.
that's part of the
We're
humor, and
also
then
selling something else.
yeah, they're also it's
Got
also
it.
a burlesque, but I do think but the part of the humor of the burlesque is that something that she might wear, say in New York City, that people wouldn't turn. You wear that in small town Idaho, people will people will be upset, and that's part of the humor is watching their angered reaction. So I do think there is a class element as well. Yes.
Did you guys watch any other nominees that this was up against?
I
Unless I
didn't.
happen to have seen them before. I don't know what else was nominated that year. Does anyone have a list? I
I
don't know.
do. So nominated that year was Flirtation Walk, Here
Never
Comes
heard
the
of it.
Navy,
I've heard of that.
aka Hello Sailor. No, that's not true. Imitation of Life, One Night of Love, The Barrettes of Wimpole Street, The Gay Divorce, The House of
Oh, the Gay
Rothschild.
Divorcee. I know the Gay
Oh, The
Divorcee.
Gay
Yeah,
Divorcee. Sorry, yep.
the
Mhm.
Gay Divorcee.
The
I know
Gay
that one.
Divorcee. High concept. The Thin Man, The White Parade,
The
and
Thin
Viva
Man, I know.
Villa.
The Thin Man. Oh, I didn't know that was that near too.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know a few. I have. What was the last one?
Viva Villa. Viva Villa. I'm making it a little more Spanish than I probably should. And it has the exclamation mark, is where my excitement's coming from.
Is it 35 it comes out? 35 is the ceremony year, right?
So no, I have. I mean, I've seen the Gay Divorcee. And I've read the Thin Man, but I haven't seen the
Yeah.
Thin Man.
And she was in a few like the I've seen The Thin Man. So that's fine. She was in, let's see. No, that was Norma Shearer who were in the Barretts of Wimpole Street, which is about Elizabeth Barrett Browning of all people and her father. Um,
But I guess that's, I mean, there's no doubt that it is it's a film from a different time. Like it absolutely is. But some of it is, a lot of it comes down to class. Like the
mhm,
point is supposed to be that they are equals. Like that's the main point that's supposed to be there. That's why it's sort of like an American class film. They are equals. They really are. They're supposed to be that way. And yet she can't see it of him because he's lower class, and she can't see it of her because she's this upper class. So they have to sort of realize that even though they're from a different class, it's like the American sort of thing, because they're both witty and capable individuals, they're actually equals. Um, and that's I think what you're meant to sort of see it as. But you're right, he just comes across as a bully in a lot of it. But I think that's not the way that it wants you to
Right.
see
The
it.
movie's not for positive. Like the movie's like, no, this is how society is.
Yeah, but I think the point is just meant to be that they as a but I don't think it's I mean I think in general it's a movie
And
that
then
would
she's like,
say
I'm gonna marry him. Like,
but I
what
think in
message is
general the
that?
movie probably would say in general men tend to dominate women. I think the point here is that because of who they are, that won't happen anymore because she's now demonstrated her capability and now they're equals. Like I think that's the way you're meant to sort of see it working its way out. But in the beginning, because she's from this upper class and she's completely helpless, he has to sort of like act as a parent and teach her, which just comes across as sort of as wildly just I mean, demeaning or whatever word, that's how it comes across. But I think the point isn't meant to be about gender. It's meant to be more about it is making a point about gender in the sense that in general it assumes that men would dominate women, but I don't think in this case it's saying these two together match and will be able to handle each other. That's I think supposed to be the point, and that's the Shakespearean. That's where you're getting that Much Ado About Nothing thing. Or the whole point about Much Ado About Nothing is that they constantly bicker and complain at each other and just like play jokes on each other, and they claim to hate each other. And the reality is that they're the only two that could ever match with each other, because they're the only two that actually can basically have the wit capable of defending each other against the other. That's the way the Much Ado About Nothing is meant to work. And I think that's the way this is meant to work, with a combination of sort of Taming of the Shrew, where he has to be mean to her in order to sort of teach her how to display her abilities. But a lot of movies do that. A lot of movies have that sort of idea of characters that hate each other, but actually, that's just because they're capable of putting up with one or standing up to one another. Um, but I think this movie is adding in that extra element of she's completely helpless because she's never been told how to live in the real world, and he has to teach her before she can sort of be his equal. The only thing I have to say is Cosmo had a lot more respect for its readers back in the day. I mean, this is a hefty story, and it's like, I mean, it is long. Like, it took me a while to get through. They had a lot of respect for their readers back then. I also love the advertisements because this is the actual printout from Cosmo magazine. I was hoping to see like one of those like weight control with tapeworm commercials, but it's a lot of penguins and cigarettes and mouthwash and how to,
Yeah.
safe ways to keep your weight off, and deodorant. I liked the deodorant one. Oh, it's really, I quite
Yeah.
enjoyed reading the actual Cosmo printout.
hmm yeah, I once did a project for somebody where I had to look at 18th century newspapers and record all of the ads that were being run along next to Cato's letters in the 1720s. And so I got paid a cool $1,500 for doing that for someone.
Actually,
Um,
probably fairly interesting though.
it was pretty interesting. The problem is they end up having the same ads over and over again. So they range from like medicinal stuff to we found a necklace. Does anybody know whose necklace this is? So,
I love what people had to do.
yeah. If come to the house that's dark near the front, and you will find us, and we will have your necklace for 5 pence. It's that type of thing. If you enjoyed It Happened One Night and are looking for more adaptations, check out every screwball comedy through the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s, featuring Carol Lombard, Clark Gable, Katharine Hepburn, and Cary Grant.
And Spaceballs. Go
And
check out Spaceballs. Yeah.
Spaceballs.
Spaceballs.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good note. You can rate and review this show anywhere fine podcasts are available. For those viewing in YouTube land, if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the Talking Studios channel for all our exciting content, and follow us on social media at Talking Studios. Check out other shows by Talking Studios, including Talking Pictures Trivia, where we explore movies through trivia, Keep Making Movies, where we explore micro-budget films, Limited Lexicon, where we play through text-based adventure games, and Get the Point, where we slowly reveal a movie poster and try to guess which movie poster it is. Got a question for us? Call the Talking Studios hotline at 201-467-8679 and leave a message. It may be featured on a future episode. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Adapt It, wherever fine podcasts are found. Join us next time when we discuss Abandoning Neutrality. America returns to the front by exploring Casablanca and Mrs. Miniver from the 1940s.
Wow. Talking Studios.
Next week, we'll be discussing Casablanca and Mrs. Miniver. Pat, if you could give Casablanca or Mrs. Miniver an award, what award would it be?
I would give them both the award for most likely to make me join the resistance. They're definitely
Okay.
The Star Wars resistance or just the
Just any
resistance?
resistance.
Resistance.
I am gonna wherever there is an opportunity, I will take
To
it to
resist.
resist. No, I mean there. This is so basically when we'll talk about it next week. But they are very propagandistic, and one pulls it off fairly well, and the other one doesn't as pull it off as well. So I think that will be part of the discussion. But they have a point. What about you? What about you, KJ?
So for Casablanca, I think it should win the award that nobody really talks about. It's kind of an unwritten rule award. It just everybody knows that. Yeah, it's the best one. It's the because there's a lot of unwritten rules that kind of are honored in the movie. So I think it should just automatically win that. And Mrs. Minerva should win the best stiff upper lip and all that award.
Oh, a good stiff upper lip. I like
Yeah,
it.
I think the
Yeah.
whole movie they're getting bombed and they're just
They're
stiff upper
just
lip and all,
enduring it. Yeah,
Stiff up
indeed.
lip, stout fella. Carry on, old self.
Very British. Very British.
How about you, Tom? What kind of awards do you think these movies should get?
I think especially Mrs. Miniver should get the Oscar for most opposite of All Quiet on the Western Front. I think after watching Mrs. Miniver, especially Casablanca too, but especially watching Mrs. Miniver, not too long after watching All Quiet on the Western Front, and both versions. I mean, both versions. The second version especially hammers you on the head with their like, "We should never go to war. This is terrible and horrible." And then you watch Mrs. Miniver, where it's just like, "Everyone needs to make a sacrifice for the good of the British people and to stop evil." You're like, my God, this is quite a whiplash effect. So I'm going to say maybe I'll call it the Whiplash Award for the experience of watching All Quiet and then watching Mrs. Miniver too close together. So I'll give Mrs. Miniver the Whiplash Award, which I realize is only relative to me and my viewing habits, but I don't care because I'm giving out the award.